Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 42 of 5 Reasons Not to Harm Your Loved Ones During Quarantine. Today we're going to talk about wrongful convictions, the wonderful work by the Innocence Project and similar groups, as well as we'll talk about false confessions. This is the stuff that, TV is made of. So lots of people are interested in this, and I'm excited to talk about it a little bit. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours and hours, and obviously I won't keep you that long. So first, some data. As of today, there's 53,510 cases of COVID-19 in Michigan. There has been 5,129 deaths. And just now as we continue to go, it still is pretty scary to me. We have over 10% death rate in Michigan, and I just think that's too many. So then this weekend will obviously be very telling as the regions to the north open up, and although I just heard a story this morning that people are going to have to show ID that they're residents of those areas before they are allowed to enter certain businesses, restaurants, bars. I don't know if that is going to be across the state or what's going to happen. Potentially, with a lot of people could go up north this weekend where it's open, depending on their own personal protection savvy or not. This could cause us to have a wave just because of one weekend in a very select area. See, I'm outside and it's pouring. You probably can't see that part, but I'm next to this really, really beautiful. Can you see that right there? This really beautiful hydrangea bush and lilac bushes and lilies of the valley, and it smells so good. I may not go inside. I just may stay out here in the rain for the rest of the day. But anyway, back to our subjects at hand. A couple different things when it comes to wrongful convictions. And the first thing that I'll tell you is that there are depending on the data you're looking at, there are between 2.3 to 5% of all prisoners in the United States are innocent. That's up to 10,000 people who have been wrongfully convicted that are still behind bars. The numbers are astounding. The state with the most wrongful convictions is New York. They're also the state with the most exonerations, so that would make sense. They had their Innocence Project, and that looking into cases with DNA evidence that either was not tested, wasn't tested properly, or what didn't appear to be enough quantity to be tested when the case originally was investigated. Those were Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld's efforts at Cordoza University in New York, and it's just been phenomenal in all of the other Innocence projects that have emerged around the country. There's one at the University of Michigan Law School. There's one at Cooley's Law School, and a few, big ones in Chicago. And this is really, it's hard work, and we should be very appreciative, because one person who didn't commit a crime that they're sitting on death row for, or that they're in prison for, is certainly one too many. So I just don't want to forget to say this, but in most cases, if someone is exonerated, which means that they have essentially been proven innocent, And then, the question is always, do they get money? Can they sue? And unfortunately, it varies from state to state. And in most cases, they cannot sue because they cannot prove conclusively that they're innocent. They can show that they're not guilty, or that their case couldn't be proven, but they can't conclusively prove they're innocent. And so remember, not guilty and innocent are two different things. And so some states have set up funds to compensate these different individuals, and some states have not. Michigan's compensation system is fairly new. And that's a whole nother lecture for another day. So I would also point you right now, while you're quarantining, there's a great story it's on demand or on Amazon Prime, depending on what you have, Just Mercy. It's the story of Brian Stevenson, a phenomenal lawyer who worked in Alabama and represented indigent individuals, and did get a man off death row who, by going back and proving that he did not commit the crime he was accused of. Jamie Foxx plays Brian Stevenson in the movie, and it's great. So I recommend everyone go watch Just Mercy it's just a couple, I think it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's not very long. And so anyway, so what is a wrongful conviction? A wrongful conviction is either, and this is the definition by the National Institute of Justice, it's either when someone has been factually innocent, that means by DNA in most cases, or there have been procedural errors that violated their rights, an individual's rights. And those are the cases that are like a false confession, a bad eyewitness identification, and some other sort of more evidentiary factors. The 7 most common causes of a wrongful conviction, we're going to have a little game here. So you all have to participate. So I want to know, there's 7 of the most common causes that are kind of unanimously agreed upon across the country. Can you guys just type into the comments what you think the top 3 are? And I'm just going to pause for a minute while you do that. And you really have to do it, especially since I can see your names and I know who's there. So just give me a comment of what you think the top 3 are. And I'll tell you that bad lawyering is number 6. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 42. Sorry about that logistical internet issue. So I'm just going to give you a minute to all tune back. I see a few of you are back. A few of you have not joined back yet. But I'm also trying to find, now I'm in like right next to my, the little, what's that box called that gives you Wi-Fi? The router. I'm right next to the router right now. So hopefully we can have a better connection because I'm in good proximity to the router. Okay, so we were talking about, before we lost each other, that I asked you what the top 7 reasons were that I was about to tell you the top 7 reasons for wrongful convictions. And and I gave you a clue that, number 6 was bad lawyering. And I wanted to know what your top 3 were. One of you wrote in prosecutorial misconduct, and that is actually number 5, just above bad defense lawyering. So, the, basically, the answers, since I don't have anyone else writing in, and they still didn't come back, many of them, is number 1 is eyewitness misidentification. Number 2 is invalidated or unvalidated forensic science. Number 3 is false confessions. Number 4 is jailhouse informant testimony. Number 5 is police and prosecutorial misconduct. Number 6 is a poor defense lawyer. And number 7 is systemic bias or implicit bias. And I'm not really going to talk about the eyewitness misidentification. It's super interesting though, and I urge you to go on YouTube and look for Elizabeth Loftus, Loftus, at her YouTube videos about eyewitness testimony and eyewitness misidentification. And you'll see, just all the junk behind identification evidence and its scientific invalidity. And so it's very, very interesting, but unfortunately I don't have enough time this minute to go through all of that with you. So in talking about wrongful convictions, and some of these features that we see across the board, the quick and dirty of why they happen, part of it, as I mentioned, number 7 is systemic bias. There is a bias. I think it's dispelled a little at this point, but there is, a bias within the justice system that if an investigation has been conducted and it points to a suspect, the suspect is guilty. Even though we know they're presumed innocent, we know that that it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt before they're guilty. But sometimes, the way that the crimes are reported or the way that officers document the evidence, it can spin in a way that makes people guilty. I tell my clients often that, I'll say, well, we can't make decisions about the case until we review their evidence. And they're like, why? I know what happened. And it's like, well, that's great that you know what happened, but we have to defend what they think happened, not what you think happened. And sometimes, most of the time, almost always of the time, those are very, very different stories. So when we look at, so that's sort of the systemic bias. Then, bad lawyering. What does that mean? Bad lawyering is, often there are attorneys who will just take any case, not really knowing the nuances of that kind of particular case. I see lawyers without enough experience take very complex criminal cases even now, and they just want help from more seasoned lawyers. I see cases where lawyers want to do every case with every crime exactly the same way, which you certainly cannot do and do effectively. You can't defend a drunk driving case the way you defend a sex crime with a child, or the way you defend an armed robbery. There's different evidence. There's, for an armed robbery, you probably have to know about ballistics and gun tool marks, and you have to know about breaking and entering. You have to know about search and seizure, all of those different, evidentiary concerns. You have to know fingerprints. You have to know just different things that could be there. In an armed robbery, you probably have some eyewitnesses as well, or people who saw the crime or the preparation for the crime, or heard someone talking about the preparation from the crime. You have a lot of possibilities of witnesses that could be in that case. In a sexual assault case, you usually just have, the two people. And sometimes you have physical evidence. You might have DNA, you might have the sheets, you might have, some text messages, but, the evidence is people and the credibility of the people, and then with or without the physical evidence. In a drunk driving case, you have to know about alcohol absorption rates. You have to know about the difference between whole and I think it's plasma is what they compare it to. You have to know about how long it takes for alcohol to absorb in a person's body so that it would impair them. And you have to know if, that's based on when they last ate, when their last drink was, if it was a shot, or if they had been sipping over a long period of time. You have to know about the national standards set by the National Traffic Highway, is it Society? No, National Highway Traffic and Safety Association. That's what it is, NHTSA. So you have to know that stuff. In a child sexual assault case or any child witness case, you have to know the forensic interviewing protocol. You have to know how memory works. You have a bunch of other things. So criminal lawyers are not a one-size-fits-all proposition, and that's why when they think they are, it can be a factor in leading to wrongful convictions. Number 6, we talked about prosecutorial misconduct for a second, or police misconduct. That could be there's hidden evidence, there's evidence that they knew was there and they didn't collect. It could be evidence that's not disclosed but is known to the prosecutor or to the police. I had a case once where there were 8 people interviewed by the police whose names never showed up in the police report. It was helpful to us, so it wasn't in the police report. So that's the importance of doing, investigation and ascertaining what is there and what should be there and what isn't there. All really important in the analysis. The jailhouse informant testimony, snitch. It's not always the jailhouse informant. Sometimes it's the fellow gangbanger. But these are people who basically want to lessen their own sentences or their own culpability. And so they make a deal and, sell their soul to get less time or to completely get out of their charges. These people are, usually the most common, they're cellmates, and they have heard, either their cellmate who's your client, talking on the phone to a loved one, or they'll say, yeah, to bed, we were talking about this other guy who just came in, who was charged with murder, and Joe roommate told me that he was the guy who did this other one with these facts. And then they become the prosecutor's star witness and they get a break on their sentence. And so that is all, that's how those come about. Or you have, a seasoned gangbanger who's in prison, who is now, he's still running the gang from, and he cooperates with the police, and then he gets a break on his sentence. And it's not as extreme or as direct as what you see on TV. A lot of these cases, they deal until after they testify, and they testify truthfully, and essentially they're testifying to a confession. So it's very hard for jurors to just disregard those types of statements. It's also, getting into the false confession category, which is number 3. That's number 3, false confessions. It's unfathomable to people, I think, overall. Someone would admit to something they didn't do. So what you need to understand is that a police interrogation is not a friendly little interview, the way that, I would talk to you if you were in my office, in my client, or, where we have an exchange back and forth. It's pretty equal. There isn't one person talking more than the other. It's an exchange of information. It's an exchange of inquiry, and question and answer. And there's a genuine interest to learn the information from the other person. A police interrogation is a completely different dynamic. The goal is not to get the information. The goal is to get the person to incriminate themselves. The goal is to get them to make of any kind. This is done through techniques that they learn in the academy. There are many different techniques, but they're all kind of rooted in the Enbow and Reed method. And basically, there's phases of an interrogation, and the officer or detective is going to build up trust, and then they're going to take the person kind of a point of no return, where either they have to admit or something really, really terrible is going to happen to them. The police are allowed to lie about the evidence that they already have in the case, even if it doesn't exist. They can say, hey, dude, we have your finger, we have your DNA, you're going down. It would be a lot better for you if you told me what happened, so that you go down for crime than, what I'm going to get you on. And, or sometimes they'll just come right out and say, okay, dude, like, I know you did this, but did you really do this, or did you do this other thing, which may be more severe, it may be less severe. It's all a mind game that's being played with a vulnerable person. And you don't need to be disabled or have a low IQ or be a child to be subject to this kind of brain control type of conversation. It's fascinating, and there's a lot of YouTube videos, and you can watch it happen. So I can send you, are interested, and just shoot me a message or put it in the chat, and I'm happy to do some to look at on YouTube. Invalidated forensic science. A lot of forensic science has been debunked as junk. For example, dog sniff evidence is no longer scientifically valid evidence. There's some techniques of gathering physical evidence that have been found not to maintain the integrity of the evidence. So that has been debunked and not allowed in court. Tool marks are another one that has been, debunked and cannot be brought in as scientifically reliable that a crime was committed with that particular screwdriver that's been mass produced for 10 million units over the past 20 years. So those are just a couple examples. Eyewitness misidentification, as I said, is number one, and it is a huge, huge problem. It brings in the dynamics of memory, of stereotypes, of common features, people, of how they do lineups or a photo arrays to have the person pick out someone. Again, it's been studied, and there's a lot of wiggle room for confirming biases and for error or pressure for someone to pick a certain suspect. And so that's a big problem. If the description of the perpetrator is that he was wearing a green jacket and jeans with a hole in the right knee, you can't have a lineup of 5 men that only one of them has a green jacket and a hole in the right knee. That's just an example of what used to happen. So that is, the number one reason for false convictions is based on these bad identifications. The other thing to think about in these cases, and I'm going to tell you about one of mine in a minute, but is that the original cases that were by the Innocence Project were only cases, and now we have other clinics and legal entities that are looking into false convictions based on other evidence other than DNA. So if you're looking at any of the research or the documentation, they're usually, the cases and the exonerations are separated by DNA or non-DNA cases. So you look at both. So I had a client, and his name's Jamie Peterson, and it was one of the best days of my career. He had been convicted in 1996 for the rape and murder of a local woman in his small town in northern Michigan, and he had, it was very, very, very controversial. The woman who was allegedly raped and murdered was 86 years old, I think. And when Mr. Peterson was accused, he was 19. He went to prison. There was some DNA evidence, but it was of a quantity that could not be tested. It's also important to note that, when you test DNA, you can identify, whose DNA it is, but it can't tell you how it got there. It can't tell you, if it was involved in a crime or not. And so, and as I said, back in the 90s, the science of DNA was not able to test, every sample that was collected. We just hadn't gotten there yet. And as time went on, we were able to do that. So Jamie Peterson was convicted in 1998 for this crime that allegedly occurred in 1996. He was sentenced to life without parole, And in the case, there had been this DNA that could not be tested, and there had been a confession. Jamie had a pretty extreme learning disability, a very low IQ, and he was exonerated in 2014. I actually personally walked him out of jail and out of the courthouse, and that was just unbelievable. And we were able to show, and this was the phenomenal work of the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic, to that time of Dave Moran and a bunch of really wonderful lawyers, that it was in fact a false confession. And when they tested the DNA, it was not Jamie Peterson's. It was also a case that involved misidentification, and I'm going to show you two pictures right now. And one of these people is Jamie Peterson, and oops, I was goofed up with. And one of these people is the man whose DNA matched. And as you can see, there's some resemblances there. And the person, this one, is Jason Ryan, whose DNA matched. And it's all backwards on when you're doing this. And then this is Jamie right here. So obviously that was a huge injustice. And thankfully, these wonderful attorneys were able to get him a new trial, get his conviction set aside, and then myself and another attorney were brought in to do the retrial and join the team. And at that point, we were successful in having the prosecutor's office not retry him. It was dismissed, and he was, as I said, we walked him out. It was, again, raised all kinds of issues in this small town. There was a lot of angry people when he was released, and he did actually get compensated in a federal case at the, and so he did get a little bit of relief. But I want to end this story with kind of my favorite part of the story, and that is that after he got out, he wanted to go to Big Boy. I'm sorry, not to Big Boy, to IHOP. And so we went to IHOP, and we sat down, and think about it. He had been incarcerated in prison from 1998 to 2014. So think about, he didn't know what the internet was. He knew about like bag phone, cell phones. He certainly didn't know about a smartphone. I mean, the world had just evolved and changed, and he didn't know what social media was. So he wants to go to IHOP. So we go to IHOP, and he orders a waffle with strawberries, a strawberry milkshake, a stack of Silver Dollar pancakes with whipped butter, bacon, sausage, and sunny side up eggs. And it was like, wow, like that's a lot of food. And as we were sitting there, he was just so excited. And he was also excited to eat with a fork, because in prison they don't have forks, they have sporks. You get like one piece of silverware that's the fork and the spoon. So Ed, he was telling us, that he didn't really know what anything was on the menu, but the things he ordered are what he saw in the commercial. And while he was watching TV, while he was still in prison. And, I think that that's just so telling, when you look at false allegations and how hard we work to make sure those people aren't convicted. And then you look at the false convictions, the wrongfully convicted, and, how do they get their life back? And so just something to think about, and know that, you're presumed innocent for a reason. Hope the justice system works so that, when the innocence is removed, it's people who really are guilty. So that 5 reasons not to harm your loved ones. Protective services workers are essential. The police are essential. We have a new article today, actually, that I didn't talk about because of time, but there's a new article just published today about COVID-19 in the Michigan prisons, and I'll talk about it tomorrow because, as I said, because of time and our technical difficulties, I didn't get to it today. And number 4, because parents can get in a lot of trouble for kids being kids. And number 5 is, of course, that very few people, if anything, looks good in horizontal stripes. So with that, I will bid you farewell. Have a beautiful, wonderful weekend for Memorial Day, and I will catch up with you on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Have a great weekend. Bye.